Hi there. It's quite a long time since I did a longer video, and I just thought that I should do one. And yeah, so for the last maybe almost 4 weeks to a month, or maybe somewhat shorter, I've been not thinking as much as I usually do, and I still have been quite. I choose to be quite solitary time to time, but I've thought less and kind of gone more towards pleasurable activities and just experimenting somewhat with that and see how it changes my mood and changes my thoughts and so forth. And I realized and also been quite liberal about other activities, as like for example, especially when I pick it up again, I get quite in a good mood when I started drinking coffee again. So I started to drink coffee quite much actually, and I also try to break some routines, because some routines can be too, even though I have optimized at least earlier for quite well, I still do optimize for very much free time, or but I've not systematically gone like, okay, my whole from 12 at lunch, like, and the rest of the day I will be free from duties and so forth. But now I'm more like, well, I don't really care when I go to bed, or if I'm to sit up for a while, I can do that. And meals, well, I still do meals and so forth, but it's still kind of breaking. And I've seen it's quite liberating to not feel that you have to do everything exactly as you used to. Sometimes many people say that it's good to have some daily routine and that might be true, but I also found that strict rules and routines are also inhibiting for your, partly for creativity, but also for your sense of, I do what the fuck I want. So for example, like one rule I've had is that, well, at least when I'm drinking coffee, I shouldn't drink coffee after like 12 at lunch, because I found it's harder to sleep. And then one evening it was like 8 p.m. and I thought like, well, what the heck, I'm going to do a strong cup of coffee now. And I've already drunken coffee that day 1 or 2 times, I don't remember. And then when I say 1 cup, I mean a really large and strong coffee, Swedish coffee, not some. And yeah, and for sure I couldn't sleep that well, and it robbed my clear thinking next couple of days, staying up at night. But it still felt like liberating to do that. I could study. I for sure had worse memory and so forth, but it was worth it, because I just felt I broke out of some things. But anyway, yeah, before I did this was like 1 week ago, somewhat more, 10 days, and before that I listened a lot to Peter Thiel, as I think I mentioned in the previous video. But yeah, that's not really on top of my mind right now, although it was very much on top of my mind for 2 to 3 weeks. But now I've been actually, and I'm somewhat inspired by Peter Thiel, but also by Elon Musk. They both have an appreciation for stories of sort of Lord of the Rings, or Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, with the books. And I've not read them, but I've actually continued to read Lord of the Rings, which I had started during the summer, and now almost half a year later I picked it up again. And also the movies I've actually quite since I'm quite picky on what I actually do in my day. It was quite liberating, but also counterintuitive, at least for what my principles are in life. You don't really do too much pleasurable things because it's, or at least that been my. So I tried to break that rule, and I watched kind of Lord of the Rings the three movies, 3 days in a row, or something like that. Not exactly, but somewhat. And then I actually watched all the Hobbits movies, the more recent one. The last one is not as good as the previous 2, but I watched them, and I actually, when I did that, I actually did it again, watch all the Lord of the Rings movies, and then actually some days ago I watched 2 of the, and I just finished the second one of the Hobbits movies, so for the second time. And I started to watch the 3rd movie, but I thought, oh, it's not that good. And I actually did it mostly because, partly because Peter Thiel is quite motivated about. I think it's quite deep meaning in these films, or in the books at least, or there is something that he has an appreciation for, at least. I don't know exactly. He doesn't speak about it that often, but I find it quite, good thing to do. Just because it was fun. But a thought that lurks in my mind all the time is that, well, no, I'm doing as everyone else doing. I'm just sitting at my home watching movies and try to find the easy way to pleasure. But I figured that maybe, like for example, one idea that caught on that on some level justify, even though I don't. What's it called? What's the word? I admit that I never really had this justification in mind 100% when I did it, but it was there. I had a hint of it, but I realized more concretely that, and this is what the thought was. It was that when you watch actors, and in general when you watch, basically actors, people from Hollywood, they, for sure, when you're an actor, you it is an incentive, and it's something that's good to look good. That just, you don't have to, but that's a trait that's good to have. And you also usually have a way of working your facial muscle and your way of speaking that is compelling, or that is intriguing. Take, for example, I've never really noticed it until recently, but Leonardo DiCaprio, when you hear him speak, I don't know if it's some sort of American accent or something, but his way of speaking, it's like music to the ears. He has some accent or way of putting forth the words and so forth, so it just sounds right. It just sounds great. But anyway, and when I did this way of reasoning, and I also thought about what Peter Thiel said, that it's sort of like, we have an interview that is sort of on a deeper topic in philosophy, and I actually read the article that was based on it. I don't think I mentioned it here. It's quite deep in some sense, and one thing that he put forth is that the medievals, and this is quite more or less a question or an argumentation, not necessarily for religion, but it's what's it called, adjacent. It's similar, at least. And he says that the deepest question of human nature, and by the way, in another interview he says that he's not really compelled by the evolutionary, like Darwinian, only explanation of human consciousness as a process of the brain, a materialistic copy process in the brain, which is basically what many people say, but I've also stumbled into that hesitation to fully believe that everything is in our brains is only like, it's not that I necessarily believe in something unnatural, it's just that I can't be convinced that the experience of consciousness is simply, we can't know for sure that experience is only that. It could be the case, but since we don't know, we can't assume it, and that's my problem. And exactly the thing he says, like exactly that, we have no idea what consciousness is really, so we can't really say that. But anyway, that's not his main. That's just a sort of validation that makes me resonate with what he said, because it's the same thing that I've been thinking about. Is that is still like, I can't 100% just think that humans or any sensible organism is only. It's really a question about the soul, even though I not necessarily think that the humans have a soul. They might have. I haven't really thought about it too much, but adjacent topics, of course, but about consciousness and those I thought a lot about. And anyway, but the thing he brought up was that when the medievals, those, medieval times where it was much more before the Enlightenment, it was lost about about Christianity and faith, on many faiths, like the early medieval period was a lot about it was the Muslim world was sort of the dominating one, and later on the medievals. And some people see it as a dark age, the whole medieval period. It was something between the antiquity and the Enlightenment that was dark. Other people say that, well, the reason the Enlightenment came to place was because of the medieval situation, maybe the Christian situation, Judeo-Christian, some people speak about. And but I don't know what is true there. I just but anyway, what so again, back to the topic. He said that the medievals believed in the intellect, and well, he has a reasoning there that I won't go into, but one thing he says basically is that with the peace of Westphalia, which is after the 30 Years' War, which is basically the main large conflict in Europe, like a really big war in Europe, where sort of even Sweden participated. We were kind of a quite great military force back then, at least in comparison, or with regard to our numbers, which were quite few. But despite that, a quite big part in that, and it was also the remnants of the Roman Empire, Holy Roman Empire. I don't know everything perfectly, but it's the Danes, Denmark, and it's the British sort of England, and it's France, and it's Spain, and so forth. I don't know exactly but anyway, it sells finally. So this is really about a war about religion. So it's after the Reformation. So it's about mainly some Catholics against Protestants. Not that France was well, it's complicated, but anyway, you can say it's a war about religion. And earlier than that, we had the Crusades to take back Jerusalem and so forth. So this is a period with a lot of fighting, and what he claims, Peter Thiel, which is sort of the main point here, it is that if we could get peace and no war, then sacrificing the questions about the depths of human existence and nature, then that's worth doing. It's worth sacrificing those really deep questions about human nature in order to avoid war, because that's ultimately what the questions seem to lead to. And why do I bring up that? Well, it's what was my original thought here? He has that as a compelling argument for at least that there might be something to explore in that area, but I'm not sure why I brought it up, but it's an opening door for, like all philosophical considerations, it sort of risk undermining a lot of the knowledge that we already have. Even though it might be terribly wrong, it sure can be. And philosophy and theology are sort of, even though they could be seen as counterparts, it could also be the case that science is a counterpart to philosophy and theology. So it's, and if you don't know what theology is basically philosophizing about religion. And if you're not religious and don't like the concept of God and all that, then, well, I can understand, but I'm not. I've talked about this before. I think I sort of am agnostic, but I don't have that much of a conviction that I know that it's impossible to know, or that I know anything. It might be possible that to know that there is no God, or to know that it is a God exists, but I have sort of, I feel like the philosophical questions still make that option available or open for more inquiry, so I can't really say that I'm not fascinated about the questions, but because I am. And anyway, what I started about was for sure that I was interested in Peter Thiel and everything he said, and then I was about to connect this to what I've been doing last 2 weeks or so, which have been lots of Lord of the Rings, really, new movies and reading. And I guess I've read I'm not remember exactly, but the end of the first book, and I've read the second book, and now I'm on the third and last one. I listened to The Hobbit years ago, so I don't think I will read that one. But anyway, and I've actually felt, even though, because last month and almost 2 months, I've been quite more on my own than usually. Actually, not that much meeting with friends and so forth, so I've been quite alone. But I actually, at least when now, last almost 2 weeks, when I just watch movies and so forth, I actually feel better than otherwise. I actually do, and that makes me confused, because on some level I thought that socializing is really, you have to do it, and I've long suspected that. I've seen, like, for example, even though I haven't fully admitted it, I'm still thinking about it and trying to figure out how important it is. But I've suspected that social interactions and being with people is really important for being both healthy, but also to be happy. But this seems to go against that, and I actually do think, this was the connection that was so important. Because I thought about these movies as sort of substitute for human interaction, which is not that sound, but at the same time, and now it goes back to my original thought, where I started with a video, that actors seem to have something that is not, I'm not sure they are really appreciated in society elsewhere. It's not that people don't like it, they like people that is well, looking good, or at least that have a way of interacting and playing with their facing that are appealing to people. I think that's not unfair to say. I think it's true that, like, otherwise I think if the actor looked terrible, of course there is a lot about the story, but you really, if it is the good guy in the movie, you usually want to look up to that person. There is something that is appealing, not just how he or she looks, but also how they talk and how they perform and so forth. And this is the connection. Now I remember. Peter Thiel claims that, and this is the thought I bumped into earlier, but instead of having these violent wars and so forth, we could have, as he said, violent video games, and we can have movies and sort of long stories and so on and so forth. Instead of this, and he said this is probably not that healthy. We just do this introverted thing, consume these movies, and then we instead of solving the problem. I think it's right. I really thought that when I watched this when he said this, and probably agreed when I read about it first time, which was about, I stumbled in a more intellectual text, which was probably half a year ago. Then I really agreed with him. But then I thought, it's not only a substitute, and sometimes the substitute, if you take the substitute, you won't go down with the deepest problem you have, because you'd use the substitute instead. But if you don't use the substitute and get in a condition in which you don't solve the issue anyway, then you're worse off than taking the substitute. And then I thought, maybe the motivating force for humans today, which previously was in wars, and especially for men, I think there's a difference between men and women here, but we're still similar in these qualities of some people being more appealing to look at and interact with. That's not to mean that they're more better people. I mean, they could be terrible at math, but Einstein came to potentially gives much more to civilization than they do. But what I'm saying is this compelling quality of human beings can provide sort of an motivation, not just the stories, even though that's a good part in it too. So in order to handle life, and I think, by the way, that people who are like this really emotional part, this human part of interaction, playing with faces and their language and all that stuff, that nuance in behavior, nuance in behavior is a good way to put it, that nuance in behavior that is appealing, I think they're extra vulnerable for the absence of, for example, religion, the absence of the deeper questions about humanity. And I think that they're drawn, like, for example, our actors, and also think that, but I might be wrong about that. It could be that everyone is like as, but I still think it is those people who are like for example, when you see, often when you look at an interview with an actor that you haven't met or seen before, you're just seen him or her in lots of movies, you're quite surprised all the time. And I find that many of the men are, especially in them playing a hero and so forth, they're quite, it could be due to drugs and so forth, but they're quite jolly and timid and very friendly and smiles a lot, and almost like the opposite to a great leader, in the sense that they are, even though I think that the quality is good for someone with influence and sort of leadership, it's almost as if they're has sort of beat the low rank. They're so smiling, and even actually no sense that I've associated with myself. Sometimes it's not as much anymore, but it's still there that I've always been quite smiling person and so forth. But anyway, I think that way of behaving is not that good if you want to advance in a firm. You will get along, but you won't get an authoritative position. But I also think that, and this is a thought that I've been struggling with, or like, for example, it feels like all this genuine interaction, even you could argue actors are deceitful because they are kind of sort of manipulating you into thinking you can say one thing and they can act in a way that not reveals their true intentions and thoughts and so forth. That's basically the downside of being good at covering your emotions and way of being, because you can manipulate people to think that you're all right even though you're not, and so forth. But I think that these people are not really that good as politicians and so forth, at least not in the climate that is right now. And I think politicians, the political environment has been drained from these personalities. They go to, maybe because there's no stamina, sort of the religious context and so forth, that could provide that motivation. But so how do we solve that? I don't know. But here's my thought again that connects all of this, that consuming, when I consuming I mean watching movies and even read books that have this quality of people doing admirable things and people being appealing to look and hear and so forth. It could be that substitute fills the void that is so, that people are so desperate for, and maybe even more so those people who are like have this emotional component and sort of vulnerability, I would argue, even because I think that that's quite similar to the acting personality too, which I sort of myself associate with, that makes us more vulnerable and easier to not be, to have a life that is just mundane and you go to work. I think the acting personality have a more difficulty to stand out with that, or to endure that, and that even though you might not want to be an actor, it still could be true that consuming these type of movies could bring some sort of resilience, or at least some sort of emotional basis for feeling better and provide motivation, mainly providing a motivation. But yeah, so because I can't see why I would be more happy when I've just looked at a lot of movies and read. When, of course, in the short term, it's obvious that it's like taking a cup of coffee. I feel great when I do it. I just fear that in the long run I won't be, because taking drugs just because of which coffee is, it's just really not a long-term thing to. But then I figured if you're actually doing that all the time, doing things that makes you feel good, then you're going to feel better and maybe get more into motivation and so forth. So that's at least the most biggest change I've done in my life at this stage. It's not a change like it's permanent, but I'm experimenting and really doing a lot during the day that makes me feel good, actually. And that's not something that I've been doing for the last sort of, I've optimized for other things. I've optimized for doing the right thing. But now I realized some things that are pleasurable or actually sometimes the right thing to do. So of course you have to have what's it called? Sense of duty and to do difficult things and so forth. But it's also great value in you doing what's pleasurable. And pleasurable is sometimes it's just picking up a movie and watching it, I guess. But even better if you can have that story associated with a more larger context, because there are quite, if you read Lord of the Rings, which could be a reason why Peter Thiel and also Elon Musk appreciates this, is because there is some wisdom, you could say, in those. And Tolkien was a Catholic, so he was Christian, and so there are some, you could at least distill some sort of Christian perspectives that are not maybe that what atheists search for, but it's also questions about morality and sort of morality, character, and even philosophy and wisdom. And even though you might not come to the same conclusion about that wisdom is sort of in the Christian or in the theological or religious realm, it's still wisdom in itself, which is a topic which I would argue is closely related to morality, and like being wise is having a good conception of what morality is, for example. I would definitely argue that's the case, but that's not the only thing. It's also about the reality, and it's about decision making and how do you view the world and so forth. But there are components that are like some themes in Lord of the Rings are like the emphasis on sort of friendships and doing good and being together in times of hardships. I think there are many common themes that in any story that makes any story good, and I think those themes actually obviously appeals to us, but there's also some sort of confirmation that I do think that we need in order to navigate our life. It could be so simple, but actually the most simple and important things of being a human being is to be like the most simple and fundamental things are oftentimes the most important, in the same way that, for example, Charlie Munger has talked about a lot. He says that about simple ideas and fundamental ideas in science, he says that take an idea and take it seriously. It's just not taking the idea, okay, I know that this is a fundamental idea in economics or in physics. Not taking it seriously, meaning just going for all the other small ideas in the same academic disciplines, is not as fruitful as taking the really central masterpieces or central pieces in the academic discipline really seriously and contemplate those, because that's the foundation really. And it could be the same with being a human being. If you aren't exposed to these fundamental ways of being, really, that is having a dynamic in relationships where things happen, there are hardships, all those things, which is not easily obtainable when in our current age, I would say, in civilization. It's the downside of civilization when everything is going as it should or so forth. Even though I don't think we should start wars just to get a purpose, that's totally wrong way of doing it, but we need to feel some level of purpose. And I think this goes back to my thoughts about the vision for our society and so forth. And I don't go into depth with that now because I've done that before, but that is really what I see as actually never really formulated my conviction in that way before, but or that my thoughts, that I actually can associate that with my vision, that we should have vision for the future and so forth. But it's really the same as with to get together with people to strive for something really hard and get together with other human beings and try to cooperate in order to accomplish this. This is really deeply embedded in being a human being, and I think that's what Hollywood actually provides in movies and stories and so forth. And it can make you maybe even a better human, but it can also make you more happy to get that, because I don't think that going to school and going to the job provides the same. It provides some part of it, and for some people it might be the good thing to do, but for me, for example, I can't. That's not enough of a purpose for me. And it becomes the same substitute as the movies, I think. But if you don't want to be committed to, for example, a job or an education that you're not full convinced of, it's quite suitable to have the right movies and books and stories to consume and contemplate and connect that to your philosophy and moral reasoning and so forth. I think that's maybe a good thing to do, but I could be wrong. Could be wrong that I watched that many movies and so forth, but I try to experiment and do more things that I think are really fun in life and see what the consequences of that will be for my behavior and way of taking initiatives and being creative and so forth. And really connect that to my other pursuits, which is knowledge and insight and some sort of good influence. I think that's a sound and good approach. I think I will end there with that, and see you next time.